Hi everyone, I'm happy to virtually welcome you all to the special episode of Ad Art Show 2020 Lunchtime POV from MVVO Art. My name is Emily Anastasi from the MVVO Art team, and it's my pleasure to introduce the last episode of a program hosted by Erika Wong of To Practice Practice and Alexis Hyde of softcore.la. Needs and approaches. What do I need and how do I approach it? Welcome everyone, let's get started.
Hi.
Welcome, our last one. It's been fun, guys.
It has been.
Let's end it on a high note.
What do I need? How do I approach it? Tell me, Alexis, how do I approach the things I need? What do I need?
We have to figure that out, right? I mean, this is something that is, I think a lot of artists don't think about. And I think a lot of people don't think about it in general. I'm not just like trying to pick on artists, but like, what do you need? Like, and what do you want? Is probably the better to start with. Like, what do you want? And then you can figure out what you need. Like, I want to have a retrospective in 30 years of the tape. Okay. What do I need? Then you work backwards, right?
That's the goal.
I know, right? Well, I've decided to become, really important artist here. But, then I look at and I see who are the artists who had this show at that gallery that you like? Who are the artists who've done that brand collaboration that is your dream collaboration? And how did they get there? You can work backwards. And you can see like, okay, like they started off at this school, or they started off at this juried competition, or they were working at this gallery and they worked their way up. Like, you can really learn a lot from the artists who come before you. And maybe you want to do something a little bit different, but finding out what you need to do to get there first, or like how they got there first is a really good place to start.
No, I totally agree, because sometimes it just seems so daunting. And I guess it is really daunting, but then like who do you ask? What are you asking? And when you don't know those questions, I think the easiest way or method is probably to go and look at what other people have done.
Right. Because it's hard to, you see, artist Susie Q at the Tate, or artist John Doe with Nike, and you're like, oh my gosh, what a huge achievement. But the way they got there was one step at a time.
No, definitely.
So it's easy to like digest their steps ahead of time, as opposed to just being like, this is my, the end goal, because it's yes, there are outliers. Yes, there are those wonderkins who do just go boom, and then they get the Gucci collaboration for like their first situation. But while that's not a bad goal to have, it's also not bad to have the backup of the realistic, what are the journeys of the artists who've gone here before? And you can start looking at building your journey kind of based around that, because it's hard to find those paths without, seeing where other people have gone.
Definitely. And it's funny that you're saying that you need to look at the future to go and plan in order for you to go and understand like how to approach that, because I'm in the process of doing a project right now, and that was literally what I was doing. I've written the steps that I can think of, like currently, and then I jumped to the very end of what I want the goal to be, and then I sort of like went backwards to fill in all the gaps in between the two. So a lot of times it's not just like it's not a route from A to B. I was reading an article this week which really resonated with me, is that the artist's journey is rarely A to B. It's A, and then you sort of have to create B. And may not even actually be a B. It might be like an A.1 before you can actually find out what B could be. And I think that's what we're trying to say here, is that if you don't know what your goal is, which is perfectly fine, and I think it's very normal, look at the people, as we've spoken about before, do the research and understand the artists who inspire you and have a career that resonates with you. What have they done and how have they approached it? I think a lot of this is actually searchable online.
Oh yeah. Because this is a good point too, is it's whose career or is resonating with you doesn't mean that necessarily these are the artists who inspire your artwork. You can see somebody's career and the way they're handling their work and their shows, and those kinds of navigations, and they don't have to have, their work doesn't have anything to do with your kind of work. But you can still kind of see how they've like molded their way. And also there is something to say about not knowing what you want. I would say, and I've said this before on our podcast and I've said it in interviews, if I had 10 years ago told you where I wanted to be now, I wouldn't have been able to tell you where I am now because I didn't know a lot of the things were available to me. Honestly, I would have known that I could have been a director of a museum. I wouldn't have known that I could, have started a podcast. I wouldn't have known about these things. And so I do like to keep my options open and not, have like too narrow of goals that I want. But it is nice to, kind of look around, look ahead at people who are in your areas to help build those, goals and see what people have done. And also the other way, if you see somebody who's doing something you don't want to do, and just be like, what have they been up to? All right, I'm just going to avoid that turn.
Mm-hmm. I think that that's really important. That's a really good point, is that you get to pick and choose. It's not a sum total of, okay, I want to be Kara Walker, so I'm going to follow exactly what she's done and do the only exclusively what Kara Walker has done, and completely negate that there's thousands and thousands of other people who may have done something similar, but not exactly the same. And sometimes I think when your scope is super narrow, you forget, you lose the overall picture, and then you get really frustrated because you're just like, it's not going anywhere. And why do I constantly feel like I'm digging myself a hole? And it's like, well, sort of because you are. So, pick and choose the things that make sense to you. And what I found is I draw a lot of like lines in terms of how things relate with each other. And so if this is like goal 1, goal 2, goal 3, and it looks like they don't necessarily relate to each other, find something that may tie them together, so you don't feel like you're out of options or that you're just banging your head against the wall over and over and over again, because that's just frustrating, isn't it?
It is. And we've done an episode on failure, and we're going to do we'll probably do one a season, because it is easy to look ahead at Kara Walker's career currently and think, oh, that was always inevitable. She was always going to be this genius. And we're not going to know, unless she decides to tell us all of the walls that she ran into, all of the things that she had to carve out for herself. So it does look like, just like, oh, of course, this was just like the inevitable flow of the river of Kara Walker's career. And that's absolutely not the case. There were times when she was, banging down walls. And so even when you're knocking up against, what you find to be struggles or no's or, difficulties, it's so easy to just see someone ahead of you and be like, this is perfect. But it's not. And, we have to, that failure and learning from our failures is also a part of the process, and learning what you want to do, and even successes. Be like, oh, this was a success on paper, but I didn't like the way I felt. I didn't like the people I worked with. I didn't like the way this turned out or the pressure I was under. And then you learn, and that can be, a learning process as well. And it's really good to keep those things in mind as well, because that also happens with all of the artists who are in places that you want to be, have had those moments as well.
Absolutely. And I think that touches on this idea of being outside your comfort zone and being very vulnerable. So how do you put yourself out there? Because I think that's really important. You learn sort of your script, or the things that you need to say in order for it to resonate with you, so you can communicate that with other people. In terms of putting yourself out there as a curator, what do you think is a good strategy to go and do that?
For like being like curator specific, it's, I see what's already out there. What do I like? What do I not like? Just like I was just saying. And then, we just have an episode that just launched today with Catherine DeVos Devine, who's an art lawyer, for the podcast. And she was talking about, there's a risk of putting yourself out there. The same way as there's a risk of, I think her analogy was a risk of crossing the street. You look both ways, but you're going to cross the street, and there's risks. Maybe someone's going to, careen around the corner that you're not going to be able to see. But you can kind of protect yourself of like, okay, this is where I'm coming from. This is where my base is. I'm protecting myself around, how I present myself, how I'm going to talk to the galleries per se. I've done my research. I see that they've had other guest curators in their space. I've seen that their program aligns with like my vision for a show, and I can communicate to them that. That's my protection, is like, this is why I'm emailing you. And then also my protection has been my career that I've kept up with and kept good, documentation of, and any press that I've gotten, good images where I can show them again. And this is the protection of like, this is what I have. Going in unprotected would look like, hey, I want to do a show. This is what I do. Blah, 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 blah. What can I do? What's your cut? What's the commission I'm going to get? And that sounds really silly when I say it out loud, but I promise you these emails are getting sent. I have been on the receiving end of them, and you're not protected that way, because there's no buffer to the ask. There's no context. There always needs to be context. And that's the same thing when you're reaching out as an artist, and trying to, figure out what your wants are, or getting a mentor meeting, or, picking some art consultant's brain. And it's protecting yourself of, I know who you are. This is the context in which I want to speak with you. And these are the questions that I have. And also knowing why, because part of protecting yourself as well is if you're like, I would love to, do you have any galleries you could introduce me to, Alexis? I would love to get some intros. And my question back would be, why?
Well, that's tough.
It is.
I would be so jarred if somebody said that to me, but I think that
I wouldn't say it that harshly, but there are people who will absolutely say
oh no,
it.
absolutely.
And you have to be protected. And your protection is, I would like to talk to some galleries because I would like feedback on my work. I would like to talk to some galleries because I would like to get gallery representation. I would like to talk to some galleries to learn more about the business relationships between artists and galleries. And knowing your question and having a reason why you're asking it, or knowing your practice and having a reason why you're making it, if it can stand up to a rigorous questioning, that's your protection. Knowledge is power.
No, absolutely. I love knowledge. And I think that, to reference that, not the previous episode with Kennedy, but the one before that with Christina. So she's a venture capitalist. That's a really good episode to go and draw on in terms of knowing your asks. Always have the 4 questions. If you need to put yourself out there and you don't know what to say or what to ask, think about what it is. Have 4. So in case it doesn't work out, at least you've got a few in your pocket that you can go and draw on. Exactly. So that's really helpful. And then also, I think the Kennedy episode is also a really good one to draw on, because then you can hear how artists actually speak with other people as well. So it's a really good perspective or spectrum between how a venture capitalist speaks and what they're looking for, how an artist speaks and their way of looking at their career, and then the one that we have just gone live today, which is the one with the art lawyer with Catherine, and talking about how to really protect yourself and safeguard yourself. And when we say protect yourself and safeguard yourself, it doesn't mean putting bubble wrap around you and never putting yourself out there and look at, I don't know, when you're crossing the road and looking at the road for 20 minutes. That's not what we mean. 100% that's not what we're trying to say at all.
Or spend thousands of dollars getting a copyright on every single image that you make. It's not that either, but it's knowing what your rights are. It's knowing where you're protected. And it's getting that knowledge, and then also knowing what your context is. And this is why the long-term goal is so important, because then you can form your questions around that. You can form your networking around that. You can form your outreach goals around those long-term goals and those questions that you'll have for these people that you'd like to work with. And then that's how you can really help carve your career. If it's to, a brand or a mural or a nonprofit collaboration or your Tate solo show in 2050, I'd love to get an invite, guys. Just
basically. So we hope that that's helpful in terms of knowing what your needs are, setting your goals, and how to approach it. Thank you
so much.
Thank you, Erika and Alexis, for all of your insight over the past month. And thank you everyone who has tuned in to today's live stream. I encourage you all to tune in tomorrow for our last Lunchtime POV titled Creativity Ambassadors in the Ad Industry, hosted by Bennett D. Bennett, principal of Aerialist and co-founder of 600 and Rising, featuring Stephen Rummer, SVP, Strategy and Creative Partnerships at NBC Universal, Will Krause, Head of Talent Acquisition at Publicis Media, and Derek Kozel, EVP, Executive Creative Director at Moxie and Publicis. And of course, you still have time to see the Ad Art Show up on the screens at the Oculus and get your free coffee and dessert at Italy. The show will be up until September 30th. And you still have time to go to our website and buy a commemorative branded t-shirt to support City Harvest for the rest of the month as well. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow for our last Lunchtime POV, and thank you all for tuning in.